Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guest today is Aubree Adams. She's the Director of Citizens for a Safe and Healthy Texas and the Director of Every Brain Matters. Hello, Aubree. How are you?
I'm great. How are you today, Kevin?
I'm doing well. It's going to be an interesting episode today. This is the first time that I've done this on Cannabinoid Connect, but we have someone from the opposition when it comes to cannabis reform, legalization, and access. And it's important, I think, to have, the opposing views and to broaden the discussion, right? Because at the end of the day, as I've mentioned on this podcast before, cannabis is an external substance. And just like any external substance, if you abuse it, there can be adverse effects. So, Aubree, welcome to the show. And thanks for agreeing to come on.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes. So before we get started, Aubree, why don't we just kick things off with who you are, your background, and what got you in the position to be today, which is Director of Citizens for Safe and Healthy Texas, and you're the Director of Every Brain Matters.
That is correct. Well, like you said, my name is Aubree Adams. I'm a former Colorado mom. I now live in Houston, Texas. I left Colorado because of the harms legal marijuana caused my family and my community, and the lack of treatment and understanding when it came to those harms. So I used to do physical therapy for a living. I did that for over 20 years and loved it. And then when this all happened to my family and my community, I started volunteering and talking out and warning other states and helping organizations to educate other states that this isn't working well. This is causing great harm. And so with my volunteer work, I was eventually hired by Parents Opposed to Pot, which is a nonprofit. And they allowed me to do my dream, my project called Every Brain Matters, which is a community of alliance, recovery and support, and advocacy and science. So it's a place where there's a spot for everybody. If you're just coming to find information, if you're seeking help for recovery and support, or you want to get in the advocacy part. So it's a whole community developed. And then moving to Texas, after my son's fourth hospitalization from his cannabis use disorder, I knew I couldn't bring him back to Colorado. It was not a good environment for him. It was a community that embraced marijuana and celebrated it and did not speak the truth about it. There were messages where it's medicine, it's harmless. It's less harmful than other drugs. It's okay to use. And even families were harboring him and giving him marijuana, even when he was a minor. So it was very normalized there. So I found a recovery community in Houston, Texas, through my advocacy work and volunteering in the community called Cornerstone. And it's a whole recovery community. And he came here in 2016 and he lived with host families for 2 years. And then my younger son and I moved to Houston in 2018 to join him. And now we're part of this recovery community. And I host teens in recovery in my home. My younger son is part of this recovery community. He doesn't have a substance use disorder, but he has a lot of trauma from psychotic breaks and stuff that he's been witnessing and been, a target of some very hard situations. So he works a strong recovery program. He hosts teens with me in my home, and I work a strong recovery program too. And then we literally live and breathe recovery, and we support and mentor other families. We sponsor other families to heal and grow and to recover from this drug and other drugs. And some of the families and kids just have self-harming behaviors. They don't have a drug problem.
Sure. Well, and so I appreciate you providing your background. And, one thing I will mention to the audience before we start diving deep into more specific topics is that but off air when we talked, it's that, one of the few things I think today that we'll agree on is the fact that cannabis use among adolescents is not something that I condone, or that this podcast is condone. And I think that the industry as a whole does not condone, because we do understand that as an adolescent, your brain is still developing and forming. And with some adverse effects of cannabis, we've understood that it can lead to issues with brain development and schizophrenia with people that have that type of genomic makeup, So just kind of putting that out there to kind of set the stage that, of course, you should be of age to consume cannabis, and children are still forming their brains, as you mentioned, and it's not a substance that should be consumed if you're not an adult.
Yeah, and there's two problems with the marijuana industry when it comes to when they say, and you support adult use. One is the legal marijuana is more dangerous than ever than the black market marijuana. It's more potent. It's put in more products, so it's more deceptive. It's in toothpicks and candies and suppositories and inhalers, and it's very normalized. And there's absolutely no proof that high potency marijuana is safe for an adult brain either. So that research is coming, and Colorado is taking the lead. That is one thing they are doing good with it. And the other problem I have with the marijuana industry or the cannabis industry, and I tend to say marijuana because it's in Colorado state constitution like that. That's the language they use. People accuse me of being like racist and stuff when I use that word, but that's how they have it in the legislative bills there. The industry has to target kids to normalize this. They're in it's an addiction for profit industry, just like the tobacco industry, just like the alcohol industry. And so they have to target kids because they're more vulnerable and they can hook them easier. And that's why they do have the candies and the cartoon characters and all this over the top advertising that is so out of control and so damaging to our families. So, and I can say that, and I want to talk about my Texas group too, but
as we go along with this, since
sure.
it's an open discussion, if you're okay with it, like if you say something and then I say something, we can kind of react to what we say, and then if we feel like moving on to okay. So a couple of things that you said with that, which I think is interesting, and one is that going back to again the underage use of cannabis, which the industry at large does not condone. I believe that there are steps and actions being taken in place to combat the marketing of candies. I mean, I know that they're cracking down on the use of the Mars brand logos and branding like Skittles and things like that, that a child could see as being confusing and not knowing that there's THC in that product. The other thing that I want to touch on is the science, right? You mentioned that your organization is science-based. So the question I want to pose to you first and foremost is, are you aware of the human endocannabinoid system?
Yes, I am.
What is your understanding of the ECS?
It's a very dynamic and complicated system. And because of the promotion and the normalization of marijuana, we do have a condition called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome.
Correct, we do. Yes.
And I just interviewed a doctor about that, and my son was vomiting for a good week.
But my first question is, what is your understanding of it? What is it specifically, the endocannabinoid system? What does it do?
It does regulation. It works with other systems in the bodies. And I'm not a professional, so I don't want to get into the details. And that's one of the problems with this issue, is that we have a lot of advocates talking science when the professionals need to do that. That's why drugs aren't voted in by popular vote. It does affect hormones. It does affect a lot of systems, and it's a very complex system. So it's not a simple system at all. And there are receptor sites throughout the body for cannabinoids, but there's also receptor sites for nicotine and opioids, right? And that system, the system is for amandinine, and there's another chemical that I can't pronounce, but amandinine is not THC. And amandinine is produced from our body when it's needed, and then reabsorbed when it's not needed.
Correct.
And when we introduce more chemicals from the marijuana plant into that system, we change it, we overload it, and we're getting bad, harmful results like CHS, the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. They're overloading that system. And I see people suffering from that. Matter of fact, I'm scheduled to talk to a mother whose son, that her son died from that. He became
Right.
so dehydrated and stuff that he died from it. So when it comes to medical benefits, when it comes to the cannabinoids in the plant, that has to be science driven with dose regulations, harms and risks and benefits driven by science and professionals, and not by popular policy.
Right. So there are actually a few things that we do agree on there. So first and foremost, I agree that, more healthcare professionals, scientists should be talking about this. However, the problem with that is we have pushed pause on learning the efficacy and the adverse effects, to your point, of this plant due to over 100 years of prohibition. So as an unintended consequence, the appetite for learning about this from a medicinal or health and wellness standpoint is being driven by the consumer, because there are no, they're coming about now, the peer review studies and whatnot, but there has been a lack of that data for so long. So to the credit of the popular opinion, it's all we've got at this point due to prohibition. To go back to your point about the ECS, you're absolutely right. It is a regulatory system. And you're also right in that our body naturally has receptors and produces endocannabinoids and other chemicals like opioids, right? We have receptors for those things. And if you abuse that substance, like we talked about earlier, then it can be a detriment. Absolutely. Now, at the same time, because the ECS is a regulator, there may be some people in their chemistry, their body makeup, that lacks a certain type of receptor that they need to fill with cannabinoids. We know that CBD helps with inflammation. We know that it helps with anxiety. So people that have a lower amount of that chemical in their body makeup, it's a way to regulate those things. And that is why people, and that's what people are starting to understand about this plant, is that if you don't overdo it, and to your point, if you dose properly, then you can see some benefits. And of course, not everybody's body chemistry is perfect for this. I know 2 people in my personal life that that suffer from cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. It is a thing. It's real. But they're heavy users, right? They abuse the substance, which
They're
just
addicted to it.
just like anything, right? So, and then I have one other question. When you talk about addiction, I looked up the definition of marijuana addiction by the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it doesn't sound like the term you used, marijuana use disorder, is actually the definition of addiction. It sounds like it's a new term that they created to say that it can take form of addiction, because it reads, marijuana use can lead to the development of problem use, and the problem use is known as marijuana use disorder, which takes the form of addiction in severe cases.
Yeah, so and I would like to go back to how you think people will benefit, but they have mild CUD, moderate, and severe. And there's a criteria the doctors diagnose for that depending on their behaviors. So with the drug. So and that rate is up to like 30% at this point. Opioid use disorder is about 24%. So getting back to where you were saying that you think there's medical benefits, I don't think anybody disagrees with that. I think it's the approach that's being taken. When you said that prohibition has stopped research, that's not true. There's 15,000 studies that have just happened in the past 2 years.
Would you
In
say
the
that they're would
70s,
you say that they're all objective studies? Would you say that they're all objective?
I mean, really, you're going to have me comment on 15,000 studies? I would have to look at each one. And I'm not the one to decipher that. Those are for professionals.
Oh,
I'm an advocate.
okay.
Okay. So in the 70s, they did 25,000 studies at the University of Mississippi, and they found out how harmful this drug is. And by 1989, they knew it was a causal factor for psychosis. So prohibition hasn't stopped medical research on this at all. They can get medical research. The problem is now is that we need to put medical research or any kind of research on it on hyperdrive, because what the industry has produced and what has available on the market is very high potency marijuana, where that used to be, yes, it did exist in the past, but it wasn't as accessible and as normalized as it is now. And I don't know if you watched that video I sent you from the Colorado State Capitol with Dr. Rogers talking about how overwhelmed their psychiatric units are with adult and children coming in with cannabis-induced psychosis and suicidal ideation. It is very out of control. And unfortunately, and it sounds like you, Kevin, as an individual, would only support truth, right? And science-driven, the way you're communicating with me. But the industry you're part of and you're promoting does not do that. Like the Delta 8 THC that's on the market right now. I mean, that's from the hemp industry here in Texas, working closely with the marijuana industry in Colorado. And I just had a young man relapse on that, and his mom calling me for help. So it's in the smoke shops. It's being marketed as safe and natural, again, put in vapes and candies, and it's out of control. It's completely unnecessary. Unfortunately, the industry and your side, they're very extreme, and they are addiction for profit driven. And here is a whole book of
Can I
research.
before you go into
Wait, let me
the
just
book,
show you this one, then I'll let
the,
I'm
people
sorry.
are listening, they can't see the book, so
Oh, they can't. Okay, well,
no.
it's called Cannabis in Medicine. It's an evidence-based approach. The editor is Dr. Ken Finn. He's from Colorado. This is full of cannabis research,
Okay.
full of it.
I mean,
So,
I could pull up 100 sites and do the same thing, but here, let me
yeah,
get back because you took up a lot. You brought up a lot of points. So the
okay.
first is yes, hospital beds. That is a fact. They are getting overwhelmed in the ER. I've talked with Dr. Jordan Tischler, and and it's related to cannabinoid hypermesis syndrome. He said, however, let's always be fair when we talk about this, because there is an influx. It is true. That's what's put a whole spotlight on CHS. But at the same time, because of prohibition, because of the lack of knowledge and science behind what happens to certain body types, back to my point earlier, when we interact and we consume this plant, is that it's kind of just like they come in, if they're vomiting, did you smoke or do you consume THC? Yes. Okay. Check the box, put them in there. So there is also that going on in terms of just blanket, like, let's
That's not
just
true.
file this under CHS. I mean, that's what a doctor has said. But of course, everything is two sides. The next thing I want to point out is you talked about the studies from Mississippi in the 1970s. From my understanding, the University of Mississippi is the only university in the country, or has been until recent, that was able to even do any type of research when it came to marijuana, and all that was funded by the DEA. So if you're talking about studies back from the 70s, I would say that those studies probably aren't objective, because again, you're looking at through the lens of the DEA, who has been enforcing prohibition for the longest time. The last point that I wanted to address is this explosion of Delta 8. You're absolutely right. It's not only just in Texas, it's everywhere. And I think what Delta 8 is, first off, it's a loophole, because a hemp plant should be below 0.3 or less THC. So they've found a way to convert CBD into Delta 8 THC. And to me, that is problematic from the younger generations, right? Because they shouldn't be consuming, because their brains are still developing. But at the same time, as an adult consumer, it shows the appetite for THC and the want for that psychoactive property that chemical compound has. Now, we can talk about potency levels and that. I mean, that's a whole separate discussion. But the people that find relief from THC are finding it through Delta 8 in states where it's not legal.
So getting to your where you said that you think all that 25,000 studies is not, it's through a cloud of the DEA. You don't understand how studies are published. They have to be peer reviewed. There's a process, and they have to name on there if there's a bias.
So you're telling me that they couldn't find a list of doctors and people that have that accreditation to just sign off on that's not possible?
That's not true. The studies are published by a process. And I can't tell you every step of the process, but they have to be peer reviewed. And the researchers that do those studies have to list if they have a biased opinion or approach or background. That's in every study. If it's not significant. And you have to see which studies are significant. So my point is, when you say it, this drug hasn't been researched, it's just not true. And so my two reasons for talking to you today, and I really appreciate it. And it's okay. We don't have to agree on everything.
Sure. No, yeah, we're having a discussion.
Is I need to encourage your side to start telling the truth. So people like me who have been harmed, our families have been harmed, our communities have been harmed. We do understand the true impact. I'm a firsthand witness of what happens to a community when this happens. You need to hear us and you need to work with us, because you're just out there spewing all this propaganda instead of telling the truth.
So what's the solution then, Aubree? Because it sounds like from that side that they're singling out one substance when and they're and of course the whole message is centered around the risk of children, which is super important, right? That we can't deny that. But why is it, well, let's talk about that. Why is it pinpointed on just in cannabis when we see so many other death-related causes from alcohol, from sugar even, right? Sugar is the leading death in America, and that's an external substance that messes with your receptors and makes your mood and behavior change. So why marijuana, Aubree? Why?
Because the data on deaths caused by the effects of marijuana are not calculated and made public. And that's one of the things I advocate for all the time. So correct information can be said. We have Laura Stack releasing her book on the dabbing day, 7/10, about what happened to her son, Johnny. Now, her son, Johnny, and my son were born just a few weeks apart. My son made it out of Colorado. Okay, he's still not out of the woods, and I don't really talk about him now because he's an adult. He can make his own choices. But kids are dying, adults are dying. They told my husband that marijuana was medicine. He went into a store and they said, you need to smoke about 24% THC. He was taking a couple hits a week and he was hearing voices. And I want to tell you, he has never been the same. So as I am on your side with helping people, 100%, that's who I am, to my detriment, to the point where I kind of put my health aside sometimes to help other people. I'm 100% for helping people. So the solution to this is you need to go through a science-driven, FDA-approved process for any medical benefits. Nowhere in the history of our country, or probably even the world, has a drug been legalized by popularity. And the populace is bombarded with propaganda. So my goal is to encourage more podcasters, more people that are pro marijuana to start saying the truth. My other goal of being here with you today is to the people that are suffering, that are having adverse effects, we are providing spaces for you to get help and find healing and give you hope. So at Every Brain Matters, we have recovery meetings. We invite parents, we invite other people there to come, and we give them tools and avenues to approach to try to help their loved ones that are suffering. I also have worked very closely with the people who started Maranon. So we have Al-Anon for people that have loved ones that are suffering from alcoholism. Marijuana is a different drug than any other drug. It has this psychosis approach. It has the cannabinoid hyperemesis, and people don't understand that. So sometimes when we go into these meetings and we share what's happening with our loved ones, we're shamed. We're like, oh, you're lying. That's not happening. So I want to give an olive branch to your listeners. If you are suffering, if you have a loved one suffering, it's okay to find help. You don't need to be shamed because so many people say it helps them. We're here to help you. And I reach out to Every Brain Matters. Go to everybrainmatters.org and send us a message, and we'll give you some resources to find hope and healing.
Aubree, it's when I hear you talk about like if we want to, like, if the industry really wants to do the right thing, then use science-backed data, make sure it's FDA approved. Like, do you understand the dilemma that the industry is in right now, in that they want exactly what you're saying? The whole reason why there is no FDA approval on any THC products or any even CBD related products, which is federally legal because it's hemp, is because the FDA hasn't moved on it because of federal prohibition.
That's just not true, Kevin. There's
How is that not true? How is that not true?
Do you not know what Epidiolex is? This is through GW Pharmaceuticals.
Okay, so I am familiar with that, and you're correct. It is pure CBD oil. So that is the one product that the FDA has recognized for is it medicinal?
Yeah, so that one's for the two rare seizure conditions. Now let's talk about that because it went through clinical trials, right? And it went through dose regulations and it helped about 40% of those kiddos, which can be a life-saving medication. That's a big, big deal what happened. And that's the way it's supposed to happen. Now, there was 50 children that died during that clinical trial, okay? It didn't help them. But these are really sick kids too. They have a lot of co-occurring conditions, right? So we need to embrace what GW Pharmaceuticals did and took and listened to the parents who said, this is helping my child's seizure condition and we want a purified form because cannabis is a soil scrubber. It absorbs the heavy metals from the soil. So you can be ingesting arsenic and lead and they could be giving that to their kids. So Epidiolex is a very good step in the right direction. And there is Marinol, dronabinol. It's a synthetic THC that is used to help cancer patients to increase appetite. And I've known people that have been on it. It's not a very effective medication, so it's not utilized all the time, but anybody's for whatever's going to help somebody. But the way the industry has bulldozed this is that they're harming people. And that's why we established the FDA, right? And then when politics get in the way, right? Like we saw that with the opioid crisis, when Congress got in there and passed the Marino bill and tied the hands of the DEA and the FDA, what happened? Pill mills, right?
Pill mills, yeah.
An addiction for profit. The same thing is happening with the marijuana industry. And your viewers need to know that. The marijuana industry is worse than the FDA.
But you're making it sound like there's hesitance from the industry to not go forward and go through that FDA approval process. There's only been one company that's been able to do that, and that has been GW Pharmaceuticals with Epidiolex.
Yeah, because these cannabinoids are very complicated. Even CBD can convert into THC in the right conditions in an acidic environment with heat. So it's a very dangerous drug. CBD is an
why is it dangerous?
Chemical.
Why is it dangerous when there's so many people that find relief and benefits from it? Like what do you say? Like say you're walking down the street and you walk past a veteran who has experienced PTSD, trauma from being overseas at war, and he's a recovering alcoholic because he doesn't want to use that substance anymore, and he's found relief with cannabis. What do you tell someone like that?
Well, I don't think you should be playing Russian roulette with somebody who's so vulnerable. And I think he should be educated about the effects of how dangerous THC can be on any brain, but especially a vulnerable brain.
So that's another
trauma.
That's another thing I want to ask you about.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
THC is an intoxicant, right? So I can take a hit of THC, I can down a bunch of beers, and I can intoxicate myself and change the way I'm feeling. If I'm having flashbacks.
It's a cannabinoid. It's something that naturally occurs in our own body chemistry. And when you say that it's a detriment to the brain, sure, for a developing brain, but our CB1 receptor is in the brain, and that's what binds to the THC molecule. So I struggle with when you say that it's a detriment to the brain, because that's one of its efficacy relief properties.
We don't know the level. We don't know each level of when that THC can break a brain and cause the psychosis, can cause the addiction. So we don't need to be playing Russian roulette with veterans' brains. And a clear example of this is Chris Kyle here in Texas. And he was killed by a man, right? And if you read the story, that man was self-medicating with marijuana and alcohol. When you mix marijuana with alcohol intensifies the THC. It keeps it in the bloodstream longer. And they said he was in a cannabis-induced psychosis episode and he killed Chris Kyle. So I'm not saying everybody who experiences psychosis, cannabis-induced psychosis, or any drug-induced psychosis is going to be violent. I'm
Well, I
not
hope
saying
you're
that.
not saying that he
But they're
killed
saying,
Chris
but
Kyle because he smoked marijuana. I think that
and I'm saying it's a big factor and it needs to be talked about.
interesting. Okay.
Absolutely. And we see violence like this throughout the country. The law in Thousand Oaks, California, the man that went into the bar and shot up all those people, the only thing in his system was THC and nicotine. I will say I personally have experienced violence from people that have been under the influence of THC,
You're a small
especially.
minority.
I don't think so. I think once you start researching and see that it is a factor.
Have you ever consumed cannabis?
Yes, I have.
You have?
Yeah,
When did you do that?
the last time I did, I was 16 years old and I thought I was going to die. I wanted my boyfriend to like me. I wanted my friends to like me. I wanted to be part of the crowd. And I had smoked a handful of times prior to that and had a really bad reaction one time. That my nickname is Bree. And I remember one of my friends saying, Bree, this drug isn't for you. And I'm thinking, you think, but you know, you like a guy, you want to fit in with the crowd. You want to be cool, right? I wanted to be cool. So I did smoke a little bit. And obviously I was having some kind of mental breakdown. And I remember thinking, I'm going to die. I need to get out of here. I thought my heart was going to explode. And I thought if I could just play it cool and get through this, I'm never, ever going to do this for the rest of my life. And I haven't.
Yes,
So,
and that goes to the science, right? There's some people their heart palpitates more than others based on the terpene profile or the cannabinoids that are in that strain. So your experience is very common with people that are not familiar with consuming or just their body chemistry doesn't match well with it, you know? So that's
but you have a test to
pretty
see who those people are. I mean, like,
yeah,
I
there
mean,
is. There's a shameless plug. Endocannabinoid Health has their own DNA screening that actually can tell you your own genetic makeup and what strains are best with based off of their cannabinoids, their terpene profiles, flavonoids, all that. So this is becoming very science
so that's a,
based,
FDA proven test.
Again, federal prohibition is really limiting. So the the private sector is really having to spearhead this science and this research because we're in handcuffs. So there's an appetite to learn more about it, and someone's going to do it if the federal government and the FDA doesn't move on it.
Well, I would tell your viewers to be very leery of a test like that that's not been proven safe and effective, because it is playing Russian roulette with their health. So I would encourage you to have some professionals on that aren't interested in making money or being popular, that are interested in talking the truth.
Do you have a science professional from your community? Because I can surely pull one from cannabis. And Aubree, why don't we just let them talk and just moderate?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. No, actually, I have so many professionals I'm connected with. I mean, they're very busy, but yes, absolutely. I just interviewed Dr. Renee Lev, and they actually have professional group Isaac that they just started. And I can send you the link to that. So
let's connect after. Let's connect after, and we'll definitely schedule that. That'll be like part 2, where we actually bring medical experts in. So as we wrap this up, I want to ask you, what is your understanding of the history of prohibition? Why did it start? When did it start? Do you know anything? I mean, because it dates back to the 1930s. So what's your understanding of why this plant is illegal in the first place?
Well, I know Egypt and Mexico prohibited marijuana before the United States. And Mexico particularly did it because they talked about a military hospital that they were allowing their soldiers to consume marijuana, and fights were breaking out. Some violence was going on. Same with Egypt. Egypt put wanted all countries to prohibit marijuana. So, when we talk about this issue, they're like, oh, you want to put a bad name on, you want to prohibit. I prohibit drugs in my house. I maintain a sober household to provide an environment for these teens and young adults that are in recovery and trying to learn different coping skills to take care of themselves. I do prohibit marijuana shops in communities in other states, because I've seen that this isn't about prohibition. This is about addiction for
But I
profit
want to know what
promotion.
your understanding is of why it's illegal in the first place. Like, why did it become
I just
illegal in the
told you, because
1930s?
they saw the adverse effects in Egypt and
So
Mexico.
that's not correct. No, it's Harry Anslinger was the head of
A
the Bureau
racist,
of,
right?
no, he was the head of Bureau of Narcotics.
Mhm.
I think his actions kind of spoke to that he was racist because he targeted people of color who consumed cannabis because he made it outlawed basically, and there's a number of different reasons as to why, but I think what it comes down to is money and protecting certain interests or industries because this plant is just much more than whether you want to call it medicine or therapeutic. There are actual material applications from hemp, right? I mean, before 1930s we used this plant for everything, ropes, textiles, clothing. So they ran this whole Reefer Madness campaign. And that's where I'm just getting so, I think it's fascinating that that messaging from the Reefer Madness era is still carrying on today, in that it's as simplistic as you legalize marijuana, you kill your kids. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from you and your side.
Well, what I experienced with marijuana changed my life forever. So, as you want to talk about the past and use personal politics or however you want to spin this issue, you have a whole different side of families that are saying, this is what happened to my son. I just interviewed another family. The kid is still in cannabis induced psychosis. He's been in it for 4 weeks. And it's a very scary situation. So cannabis induced psychosis is real. It's the
What is
DM.
that?
Psychosis is a detachment from reality where you're having hallucinations, delusions. So with cannabis, the THC in cannabis is the worst offender. So we know every drug can induce psychosis, right? Where you have it can be mild, a little just delusion,
How do you know
or it
it's
can
the
be
number one
very,
offender? How do you know it's the number one offender?
because the science proves it. And if you go to Every Brain Matters, hit the science section, hit where it says psychosis, schizophrenia, you can read all the science you want right there. It's all in one page. I have it already available for all your viewers. So out of every drug can induce psychosis, right? Marijuana is the worst offender because it's a fat soluble substance. And out of all the drugs that induce the psychosis, it has the highest conversion rate to schizophrenia. So when we talk about this drug, we need to talk about the present and the science, and not and anybody, whatever color they are, wherever they come from, whatever communities, poor, rich, whatever, they need to be educated of the truth. And that's why I speak up, because what I witnessed in my son, I did not think marijuana could do that. I did not think it. And what I witnessed, and I'm saying this very seriously to you, it is true, it is real, and it changed my family forever. My family is destroyed because of it. My son developed the pediatric disease of addiction. He had multiple psychotic breaks, and he did have over 3 years of sobriety. He's one of the lucky ones. I did get him help. He was surrounded and taught tools. He's out again. He's using again. I haven't seen him in over a year. So this has real consequences. Now, I'm one of the lucky ones where there's life, there's hope. I know many families that their kids couldn't take it or their loved ones couldn't take it. My husband was suicidal too. If you go to my YouTube channel, just put in Aubree Adams, you will see me having a conversation with my husband over the phone. He still lives in Colorado. I'm in Houston, and he's a changed man too. It changed him forever. My kids have a not so stable father right now. So we love him. We appreciate him. We accept him for who he is. We accept all your viewers for who they are. We're not here telling you what to do. What we're saying is that please speak the truth about this drug. Please be informed so you can make really good informed decisions, and that policies have to be driven by truth and science, because we're not having fun over here. There's a whole community of us that are speaking up, and we're being blamed and we're being shamed and we're being told we're not speaking the truth. So that's what I do. That's what I do 100% of my time now. And I'm grateful to have this opportunity, but I can't be more serious. Why people are making money and normalizing this drug, there's a whole bunch of us that are going to funerals, that are trying to get in
Thank
the
you.
way of this drug.
Okay. Thank
Yep.
you, Aubree. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective. It's always important to hear the other side. As I mentioned earlier, you did plug Every Brain Matters website and the Citizens for Health and Safety
Uh,
of Texas.
it's
So,
uh,
our Safe and Health in Texas. Excuse me,
it's
but
safehealthytexas.org. If you
say yeah. Go ahead and say the
yeah,
website.
it's Citizens for Safe and Healthy Texas. It's a grassroots organization that when I moved here, I thought, well, how can we help Texas? How can we educate Texas? And there was a group of us that formed this community. And so we do talk to legislators and do writing letter campaigns. So go to safehealthytexas.org and let's speak the truth on this drug and oppose these drug promotional policies. We do
Yeah.
not want to promote this drug any more than it already has been. We want to speak the truth.
Okay. And we also want to have a science-based discussion like we talked about and bring in your side's, scientific expert along with the cannabis industry's expert. And so, Aubree, let's definitely make that happen. I will follow up with you after this is published and we'll get it set up.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Kevin.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. Bye.